And I'd like to welcome everybody to our webinar today. Once again, I'm Sarah Maxim with the Center for Southeast Asia Studies, UC Berkeley. I'm going to turn myself off shortly, but I'd like to turn the introductions over to Professor Penny Edwards, who's one of our core faculty and also Associate Professor of South and Southeast Asian Studies here at UC Berkeley, and she will provide the introductions. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us.
Thank you, Sarah, for the introduction, and thank you all for joining us this morning for what promises to be incredible conversation and readings about new poetry from Burma, Myanmar. I'm delighted to introduce Ko Ko Thett, who will be speaking to and reading from and conversing about his new poetry anthology full length, his own collection, Bamboophobia, out with Zephyr Books, and also to the volume that he co-edited with Brian Haman, out with Ethos Books, Singapore, just this year. I'm also delighted to introduce Yway, who is now in San Francisco, very happy about that. And Yway will be reading from her poetry, and delighted to introduce and reintroduce to those who've been to past CSEAS webinars, my dear friend and colleague, Shein Win, who will be also participating in the readings, whose book, new poetry collection, The Spirit House, storage unit for the Spirit House, we featured last year. And of course, my dear friend and colleague, Kenneth Wong, who has pioneered the Burmese language program here at Berkeley, alongside translating, publishing, blogging, and illustrating. I just want to say a very few words, and I'll speak primarily to and from this anthology, picking off new shoots, will not stop the spring. And then I will hand over to the poets who you are all here to hear. No longer enough to chant the parita or protective verses, one must go online to spread the news, reads lines from the introduction. Those who have followed the brutal and destructive coup and its aftermath in Myanmar, and the protests that have followed, including the sonic protests of hurling curses at the junta, beating pots and pans, will understand some of the background to this anthology, which, as Ko Ko Thett and Brian Haman write, is one of witness poems. And they use witness poems and essays as distinct from protest or resistance poetry because, to quote Ko Ko Thett and Brian Haman, all protest writing may be witness writing, but not all witness writings are protest writings. Witness writings do not usually have an explicit political agenda, however politicized they might be or become. One of the themes of the collection is the repeat emergence versus or after the repeat erasure, as in Dr. Minzo's prose piece, The Noble, where they write, their destruction of memory will appear online within seconds. Human memory may be short, but the internet memory is long. Ngao Ba's lines, dreams denied turned into maps, maps destroyed turned into memories, memories deleted turned into roads. Mo Oswe Nyen, in their contribution to the volume, writes of a revolutionary family whose mother, for protection, recites verses from the Parita and goes online to spread the news, the quote I opened with. And Nipulei, the short story writer, in The Dharma Will Prevail, compares the thinking minds, the clear thinking that led to voting, with the brutality that followed, where Myanmar Generation Z are embattled in the fight between Dharma, right, and Dharma, or wrong, imaginative minds and rotten kleptocrats. But as Ko Ko Thett and Brian Haman write in their introduction to this highly recommended anthology, despite the military subversion of democratic elections, the jailing of politicians, mass arrests, extreme physical and psychological cruelty, sexual and gender-based violence, censorship, the heavy use of lethal and indiscriminate force with impunity, the heart of the people of Myanmar continued to burn, sadder, but perhaps indomitably wiser and more resolute. And I leave you with that quote: all destruction will generate creative responses, and this creative response has been phenomenal. And I thank again all our guests for being here today to share with you their poetry and thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you, Penny. Thank you, Sarah, and thank you to the Center for Southeast Asia Studies for hosting today's event. We are going to begin with a collaborative performance called What's Going On in Myanmar. I'm going to ask Ko Ko Thett, what's going on in Myanmar? What's going on in Myanmar?
Ko Thett, please unmute yourself.
Well, nothing unusual for someone from Burma, at least, for the whole world as well, so it seems. A military coup happened. The ensuing resistance is met with bloody repression, and now there's a conflict all over again.
What's going on in Myanmar?
The seamstress, who's lost her job since her garment factory shut down, has become a prostitute. The chai waiter who worked at a restaurant in Zagai is now a child soldier in the resistance. Just like in the old days, street children in urban areas collect used water bottles and empty beer cans. Sirs, madams, empty bottles or beer cans, please. People who live in apartments will appear at their windows and throw the empty bottles at children in the street as if they were feeding fish in a pond.
In the meantime, the junta remains brutal as usual.
A former monk who was a peace activist has become a leader of a resistance group. Of late, he was accused of hideous war crimes. It is alleged that members of his group have tortured and summarily executed at least 21 civilians in Zagai.
What's going on in Myanmar?
Nothing unusual. Fuel price hiked. There are long queues at gas station and at the roadside black market fuel dealers, just like in the old days. There's tyranny of power outage, just like in the old days. In the sweltering summer, the sales of hand fans soared. In Yangon apartment buildings, they get very noisy around midnight. That's when power is available. Midnight time is the right time when every household turns on their motor pumps for underground water for the following day.
In the meantime, the junta remains brutal as usual.
What's going on in Myanmar?
History is repeating as fast. Just like in the old days, people queue up to refuel their disposable plastic gas lighters. Lighter flints are banned. The junta suspects that flints are used in homemade weapons. You may top up your lighter. You may not make fire without a flint.
What's going on in Myanmar?
A handful of publishers have been ordered to close for very different reasons. One publisher was shut down for publishing lewd materials. The other for publishing a Buddhist treatise that claims that there's only one afterlife for humans before they arrive at nirvana, to be born again and again and again as humans. Despite widespread poverty, or because of it, Sales of Buddha statues and figurines for house shrines are on the rise.
What's going on in Myanmar?
Well, it took at least 20 years of lobby and advocacy until March 2022, when the United States formally acknowledged genocide against the Rohingya people of Myanmar. For the US to accuse Russia of committing genocide in Ukraine, it took less than 2 months since Russian forces invaded Ukraine in February. Hundreds of people have died prematurely from the double assault of COVID-19 and the cancer junta over the past few years. And the lady reminded her people not to quibble, just like in the old days. One of the leaders of the resistance claims that they have taken control of half of Myanmar.
What's happening to the poets during the Spring Revolution?
Scores of poets have been killed or jailed by security forces in the Spring Revolution. Poet Keza Win was shot in the head in an anti-junta protest in March 2021. His friend, poet Kethy, was tortured to death in May 2021.
Poet Mao Yway and his lawyer poet Yway remain in jail, though many others have been released over the past year.
One Burmese poet says, "Yway ba sway nui sya mashi," no negotiation for blood debt. Another Burmese poet, "In this spring, I have not blown myself up in a suicide bombing. I have not taken up armed resistance. I have not demonstrated my love for the revolution by getting shot in the head while holding the fighting peacock flag at the front of a protest. A nasty condition known as survivor's guilt is gnawing at the poetic conscience."
What's going on in Myanmar?
In April, a woman, the wife of a dissident who has fled from the junta, was tortured to death and her body dumped on a street in Mandalay by the regime.
The junta remains brutal as usual.
Thank you. And now Kenneth will introduce Ko Ko Thett.
Thank you very much for allowing me to be part of it. And Ko Ko Thett, I don't need a lot of words to introduce him. He's well known among the Burmese poetry circle. He is one of the leading translators of Burmese poetry. So I'm just going to let him and his poetry speak for itself.
Yes, thank you, Ko Ko Thett. And thank you, Sarah and Professor Penny Edwards, for making this happen. It's a privilege to be able to join the reading. The first poem I'm going to read is the very first poem from my new collection of poems, Bamboophobia, the opening poem. I'll read the poem in Burmese, in English first, and Burmese after English version. The title of the poem is called Ascent. Ascent. My skin was born in the year of the pig. My ascent, much later, it would rather be a Capricorn. I seduce women with my ascent. I subdue them with my skin. You will still hear my skin whinge even after maggots dwell and die in my ascent. My skin is my landscape, my ascent, my fresh air. My skin is too thick for bad weather. My ascent, incredibly thin, it will whistle underwater. I am not one of those who are sentenced to solitary confinement for life in their own skin. I can get under your skin once I walk out of my ascent. People judge me by my skin. My skin's purpose in life is to prove them wrong. Once I open my mouth, my accent will prove them right. I keep my mouth shut, my skin open. Which is truer, my skin or my accent? When it comes to swinishness, we are on the same page. In places where I am considered white, my yellow accent always holds me back. Since whatever out of my mouth is an unpasteurized lie, I will always have a yellow accent. As for my skin, it will be blues when it fancies the blues. It will be jazz when it fancies jazz. Le yu le ding. Nga ye bia gu wet in ma mui de. Nga ye bia de amya ji nge de nga le yu le ding aro makara ya di bwa lu be tu ti khan chin ye. Mai ma ri gu nga le yu le ding ne swai saung pi nga ye bia ne su mu de. Nga ye bia ga shu myo kin su yin nga le yu le ding ga le kaung le tat. Nga le yu le ding ne ga laut twat la yin daw nga ye bia ye nyi twa tan ko min cha ni ya mein. Nga su re kaung ga nga ko ban ye bia de ma ya tat pan tai pait khan ni ya da ma hot. Nga le yu le ding ne ga nga lan shauk twat lai yin min ye ye bia auk ko nga yauk twa mein. Pa lon ne nga ye bia ga ya di uru dan ma khan nai bu. Nga le yu le ding thu lai pong mya ga do ye auk ma daw le chon ni nai ne. Luတွေကတော့ငါအတန်မကြားခင်ငါအရေးပြားကိုကြည့်ပြီးငါဘာကောင်လဲဆိုတာမှန်းဆကြတယ်။ငါပါဇက်ဟလိုက်တယ်ဆိုရင်မဲငါလေလေသိန်းကငါဘာကောင်လဲဆိုတာကိုဖွင့်ချတယ်။ငါအရေးပြားရဲ့ဘဝရည်မှန်းချက်ကအပွေးမြင်အပင်သည့်ဆိုသူတွေမှားကြောင်းသက်သေပြဖို့အဲ့ဒါကြောင့်ငါပါဇက်ကိုအမြဲပိတ်ထားပြီးငါအရေးပြားကိုအမြဲဖွင့်ထားတယ်။ငါလေယူလေသိန်းနဲ့ငါအရေးပြားဘယ်သူတစ္ဆာပို့ရှိမလဲငါမပြောနိုင်ဘူး။မရောက်ရဲနိုင်တဲ့နေရာမှာတော့ငါအရေးပြားနဲ့ငါလေယူလေသိန်းထပ်တူပဲ။ငါကိုအဖြူလို့သတ်မှတ်တဲ့နေရာတွေမှာတော့ငါလေယူလေသိန်းအဝါရောင်ကြီးကငါကိုဆွဲချတတ်တယ်။ငါပါဇက်ကထွက်သမျှကပိုးတတ်မှတ်ထားတဲ့လိမ်လည်မှုဆိုတော့ငါလေယူလေသိန်းကအမြဲအဝါရောင်ကြီးဖြစ်နေတယ်။ငါအရေးပြားကတော့သူစိတ်ထင်ရင်ထင်တယ်လို့blues ဖြစ်ခြင်းဖြစ်မယ် jazz ဖြစ်ခြင်းဖြစ်မယ် Thus accent in Burmese and English in Burmese is called Liu Lidi. The next on my list is Bullets Are Dangerous, and the subtitle is I do not condone any form of violence. Bullets are dangerous. I do not condone any form of violence. Bullets are dangerous, not least because they contain lead. Lead is a heavy metal, a well-documented environmental poison. For contraception, Roman prostitutes ate sapa, sugar of lead. The hair fall, tooth fall, and downfall of Queen Elizabeth I is attributed to a lead cosmetic she piled up on her face. A 17th century Burmese monarch loved to pour molten lead down the throats of captured pretenders to the throne, who would have done the same to him had they succeeded. Lead is polonium of the 19th century. Once in the body, lead disrupts the function of aminolevulinic acid dehydratase enzyme. That means anything from headaches and sleeplessness to hallucination, depression, fits, and coma. Lead in the blood will corrode your skin, blacken your teeth, and bleed your gums blue. The black puke it produces will burn your gullet. Bullets are dangerous, especially when they are fired into a body at high velocity. The difference between velocity and speed is this. Velocity knows where it is going. It ensures instant death. And last, I will read a poem called Wet, which means swine or pig, which I wrote in Burmese first and translated later into English. Wet. လှမယ်ပြိုင်ပွဲဝင်ဝမတကောင်လိုကိုလေးလက်ဝင်လှဟာသူ့ကြောရိုးထင်းယူပင်နဲ့ပုတ်ပြီးအရားဖြေဖို့ကောင်းငင်ကဆင်းလာတယ်မြင်းတွေကိုအိမ်မက်မက်ရင်ခီးဝေးသွားရခင်းရှိတယ်မြင်းတက်နဲ့သိမ့်ပိုက်ထားတဲ့မြို့မှာနေဘူးရင်ငါပြောတာမင်းသဘောပေါက်လိမ့်မယ်ဝက်တွေကိုအိမ်မက်မက်ရင်အပြောင်းရွှေ့မရှိဘူးငါငငယ်ကအိမ်နောက်ဖေးချံကမြင်းမပြောနဲ့မြင်းဘူးတော်မဆန်ဘူးအမေကဝက်မွေးတယ်ဝက်ဆိုတာထွက်ရက်ပေါက်နေတဲ့မြင်းတွေမြင်းပြန်ကိုဝက်လိုတက်စီးလို့မရဘူးငါဟာမြင်းပြန်ကိုကုန်းနီးမပါပဲစီးပြီးတော်လန်ရေးတွေကိုနှိမ်နှင်းခဲ့တယ်ဝက်ထီးတကောင်ဝှေးတင်တိုင်းကဘာပြက်တော့တာပဲသွေးတွေရဲနေရဲ့ငါတိခဲ့တဲ့ဆရာဆိုလို့ဝက်ဝှေးတင်တဲ့ဆရာပဲရှိတယ်မြင်းခွာတန်ကြားရင်ငါရင်တုံပန်းတုံဖြစ်တုံးမယ်ရှာနဲ့ချီတဲ့မြင်းခွာတန်တွေဟာမျက်ရည်တောင်ကြားစစ်ပွဲကတင့်ကားတန်တွေလိုတဝုံဝုံတကြုံကြုံကဘာပြက်ပြီးနောက်မြင်းပြန်တွေပဲကြံရစ်နေခဲ့မယ်တဲ့တိတ်တော့မသေးကြဘူးထင်တယ် In English, swine. Like a pigeon soul, the pregnant moon has lowered herself to rub her spine against a pine limb. If you dream of horses, you will have to travel far. If you are in a town under a cavalry siege, your dreams will surely be equine. If you dream of pigs, you will remain where you are. The back garden of my childhood home was too small for a horse. It was a pig pen. Pigs are enlightened winged horses. You don't mount a Pegasus the way you mount a pig. I rode bareback. I rode out all the revolutions. Each time a young swine was castrated or hell broke loose. When balls rolled, blood went everywhere. The only master I got to know was a young master whose specialty was swine sterilization. Hooves still ruffle my feathers. Hundreds of hooves on gravel roar like tanks rolling at the pedal of the Vale of Tears. In the post-apocalyptic world, only winged horses shall remain. I'm not so sure about that. Thank you so much.
So thank you, Ko Ko Thett. Thank you for reading from Bamboophobia. And now we will be taking turns reading from the anthology. And I would like to introduce Kenneth to begin.
Thank you very much. These are, two of the poems I'm reading are my contribution, my translation of dissident poets that are part of the anthology. I hope that this is one way that I can contribute and help give them a voice. The survivor's guilt that Ko Ko Thett talks about certainly affects me, being 8,000 miles away from what's happening, but wishing also that I can do something to bring relief or at least give the oppressed a voice. So this is my contribution. The first one I'm going to read is called Fearless Tiger. Fearless Tiger is a poem that was written in prison by the late Hantawadi Uwinten. Hantawadi Uwinten was a former journalist and also a former political prisoner and a journalist. And apparently he insisted on wearing his blue prison shirt after he got out of prison because he wants to show his solidarity with the people who are still in prison. So Fearless Tiger by Hantawadi Uwinten. Burning sun, pelting snow. Sometimes the heat is prickly, sometimes the cold shakes me. My narrow living quarter sees no bright light, feel no wind blow, sees no sunshine nor no moonrise, sees no human nor humanity. Sit or gaze, sleep or think, can't get news, can't even sing a song, can't read, can't attempt poetry, can't preach, can't even speak to a soul. Samsara is empty, my world is tiny, I pace in my little space, I pause before the iron door, I stand for a bit, and my day is gone. Gone was the day before, gone is a whole day, gone will be the next day, gone, 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 get them all gone. A day or a life, a month or an age, a year or an era, I won't lose hope, I won't give up. Now I'm the anvil, later I shall be the hammer. Don't you know that truth is on my side? The people are on my side. Time stands with me and Buddha stands with me. Do you think I'll grow blunt in monotony like a caged tiger at the zoo? What a laugh. Remember, as long as the black stripes cut across my yellow bright, unmistakable and clear, a tiger is a tiger and I am just the same. That's by Hantawadi Uwinten. The next poem I'll read is called To Wilt is to Bloom by the late Maung Chonwe. People who live under oppressive regimes like the military regime in Burma learn to write poetry in coded messages, in symbolism, to bypass the scrupulous censor board. So this is one example of those. Anybody who has read about, anybody who has seen how the Burmese army opened fire against student protesters, and then what the aftermath would look like, even if you have not seen them, if you have not heard of them, if you can imagine such a scene, I think you will understand what the poet is trying to say in this poem. To wilt is to bloom, Maung Chonwe. For flowers, to wilt is to bloom. If you pluck one, one more rises. If you drop two, two more spring up. Come, knock us down, wild gust, tumble us, cut us down, storming blades. Blow your hardest, do your worst, litter the ground with our butts, trample on us, see if we care. To wilt is to bloom. That's the flower's doctrine. You may crush us, we may fall, but when we die, we rise again. One more poem. It's called The Groom of Fallen Stars. The Groom of Fallen Star was written by political prisoner and former political prisoner and student leader Meng Konai. Meng Konai read this poem as a tribute to another dissident poet at the poet's funeral. So this is called The Groom of Fallen Stars, a tribute to Diamondway. My friend, you nurtured your conviction like your own child. My friend, you burn your injuries like lamp oil. My friend, you could lick your own wounds and resurrect. My friend, you had to drape your own skin, sharpen your bone into a needle, sew your own outfit, and look marvelous in it. Go ahead, my friend. We must stay behind to heal the best we could, the injuries of the world, where the stars are falling one by one. Go ahead, my friend. We must stay behind to shield the earth's wounds from the many scorching suns with our own bare hands. Go ahead, my friend. We must stay behind to write your poetry's table of content on the world's vinyl record of grief. Go ahead, my friend. On the day the peacock banners fly once more along our school's wall, we shall. The last poem, Each with Its Own Grace by Demo. Demo is sometimes called the father of modern Burmese poetry. This is not part of the anthology, but this is also my tribute to Demo, because Demo also happened to be a former political prisoner who spent some time in prison for supporting the previous anti-junta movement. Each with Its Own Grace by Demo. The moon shine in its own light, its own glow. The little torch too, with its own reach, its own fang. The little jasmine with its own fame, its own bud. The yellow badak in its own season, with its own scent. The deep, wide river has its patterns, its own waves. The curly creek flows with its own stream, its own ferry. This, that, and everything, each a beauty in its own right. Nature blesseth everyone with charm and power as its gift. Be not jealous, hold no grudge. Envy maketh ugliness. With its own clout, in its own pace, in the right time, at the right place, each finds its role, its own purpose, proves capable in its own measure. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kenneth. Thank you for that powerful reading. And I wanted to mention that I put the links to both books, Bamboophobia and the anthology, in the chat. And if you have questions, please feel free to put them either in the Q&A or in the chat. And we'll try to get them at the end following the readings. So now I'm going to read 2 poems from the anthology. And these were also published in Storage Unit for the Spirit House on Amidan. Restaurant. I recognize her voice because it's my voice. I don't know that name because it's his name. I think your voice has a name, but it's my name. She met herself in a restaurant. It wasn't her restaurant, but it was a place she had been before. She had eaten eggs there, potatoes, Anna. The dishes had no names. The waiter had a high voice. How could you not remember me? We were married last May. The cakes were baked by professionals. One of them looked like a marvelous dress. What will you bring to the table? What is your surname? What are the camels doing here? Please change for me. Are those your wind chimes? And the title of this poem is Factory. Blindfold wound around a bleeding head. Sepia time cards and combination locks. Sound of co-workers arguing in the bathroom or the other way around. Crows captured in dim light. Murder mystery for a limited audience. Pupils of soft brazen green. Lacquerware box in an abandoned mall. Factory workers assembling cell phones and wheelchairs. A scorpion in the break room. And now I'd like to introduce Yway. Thank you.
Thank you, Momo. Today, I'm gonna read 2 poems from this book, Picking Off New Shoots Will Not Stop the Spring. First, I'm going to read in English first and then in Burmese for both of the poems. So let me go first with the poem Pretense. The title is Pretense. No one wants to be weepy. Each time I hear a name, I wonder which list is from the register of the dead or the survived. Tiny little insects, which live for a day to go away in the night, maybe mocking us, our ephemeral lives. The deceased or the living? Where shall I write their name down? Whose name will be published on what side of my memory? How long will it last? Will it be washed away with soap? Will it be clawed out with scalps? If I can't have chicken, can I have pork? In this country, thus become a celebrity of our country all the world over. A chicken egg may be as silly while it lasts. Things must be preserved in resin. When corpses were piling up, fortunately, shall we just say fortunately, while the crematorium was available for a while, my anchor turned into smoke. I was happy or sad. I didn't know where to begin. I hid behind a face covering with marks. I got away for a while. So that is the poem Pretense. Let me go with the Burmese. ဟန်ဆောင်ခြင်းဘသူမှခဏခဏမငိုခြင်းနာမည်တစ်ခုခုကြားလိုက်တိုင်းဒါပဲစင်းထဲရပါလေတေသူတို့စင်းရင်လားရှင်ကြံခဲ့သူတို့လားမြင့်မြင့်ညပြောင်အင်းဆက်ပိုးမွားတွေကဒိုးတွေကိုလှောင်ယူကြလေသိငယ်တူတောင်ဒိုးဘဝတွေကိုတေလူလားရှင်လူလားဒီလူရဲ့နာမကိုဗမာရေးထိုးပေးရမလဲမှတ်ညံရဲ့ဘယ်ဘက်အချမ်းမှာဘသူ့ကိုရေးထိုးလိုက်ရမလဲဒါဘလောက်ကြာခံပါလဲစက်ပြတိုင်းပြီးရင်ပြတ်သွားမှာလားအနာဘေးကျိုးခွာရင်ဆေးပါသွားမှာလားကြာသားစားလို့မရရင်ဝတ်သားရောရလားချက်ဥကတော့ခဏဆယ်လီပေါ့ဒီတိုင်းမြာဆယ်လီဆိုမှတော့ကြာရှည်ခံခြင်းရေစင်ထက်အတူထက်လောင်းကြစို့အလောင်းတွေထက်လိုက်ပုံထားတော့ကကံကောင်းထောက်မှစွာကံကောင်းထောက်မှစွာလို့ပဲဆိုကြစို့ရဲ့တကြိုဆက်ခဏအားတော့မှာဥငယ်တရားခက်မြန်မြန်ပဲမိကိုငွေအဖြစ်အသွင်ပြောင်းသွားတို့မှဖြစ်ဝမ်းနဲ့ဝမ်းသာဘယ်ဟာအရင်လောက်ရမလဲမသိလို့ mouse တက်ပြီးခဏရှောင်နေလိုက်ရတယ် So I'm gonna go to the next poem. This poem is the title is In the Ballpark. You get girly jealous. You are a blabbermouth. Your shyness shuts your cute eyelashes. To become a couple, you have the right to say yes. You are an erratic driver. Everyone is born free and equal, except when you are born short of decent karma. You say your son is your lot, your God, your husband. You have womanly tricks up your sleeve. You cheat, you slut. All your life you are kept and molested under the heavy Tanaka grinding stone. You deserve a bride price. You are wed and fed to him. You walk 3 steps down your house and you don't manage to get back home. You are a single mother to be. Your given name follows your family name. You are just a slave on his part to the Buddhahood. Your whole life is cooking in the kitchen. You are busy fancying a reliable. A man shouldn't grimace like a woman. A wife has to dog her husband. You are always at the lower end of the seesaw, so the other end could stay high. You are thin with intellect. You add second sense. To protect your pussy is always your first priority. Don't rape me, please. I'm just an entertainment, just a dependent. I have no right to lead this household. This poem writes this poet. So this poem in Burmese is Yibuya Apin. Manalo the window in a dame your day, yellow ali chara again. Yizari people ye peepee when I she, Lamo go yokayamoi, Lulu Jenny Gudu and Navy Mulai. Thou the king of Pialo Joy, Muya Maya Mia, Les are day. Leapolo lay, we lay a jungle pitai, day down can I, Beza can I, Liga of the Sim, Goni at Yamayan, by Lona Janke. You was so the Marlin and Menayani, Barmy Piquin as she, you would jam my chain going. The 2 are go yam lever Jenny. ယောက်ျားတိုင်မဲ့ရွယ်တဲ့။ရောင်နောက်စတုံးပိုင်း။ဟိုဘက်မြင့်ဖို့ဒီဘက်အနေခံရရင်အသိဉာဏ်နဲ့ပိုင်း။တစင်းနေတာတွေပြုမှုရင်အရှက်ကိုပဲကာကွယ်နေရတယ်။ရှင်းဗလာအားကိုးနဲ့အနိုင်မကျင်းနဲ့တော့။ဖြောပြရေးပစ္စည်းတစ်မျိုးပဲ။မိသားစုတစ်ခုယူမိဖို့တူသည်။အိမ်ထောင်ဦးစီးဖြစ်ခွင့်မရှိတူသည်။ယခုကြပြရွတ်နေတူသည်။ Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Yway. And now we're going to end our reading with Ko Ko Thett, who'll be reading from the anthology, and that will be followed by a Q&A. And again, if you have questions, please post them. And I am going to also be putting resources in the chat if people are interested in donating. So Coco.
Thank you, Mamo. I'm going to read a poem. I'll follow up with a poem by a woman writer, Mi Yway. Mi Yway, a little bit about her. She is usually a short story writer and a novelist, but she wrote a brilliant poem called Residual Lives in the early days of the Spring Revolution. That was in late February and March when the repression, began. So Mi Yway was born in 1953 in the Tho in Mon State. She is a Mon writer. And one of the words that I didn't translate, untranslatable in this poem, is called Dalan, which is, in a wide currency in Myanmar today, since, Dalan is a Burmanized Hindi word which refers to any collaborator or informer with or to the military regime. A snitch or a spy is a Dalan. So many so-called Dalans have been targeted as well by the resistant forces since the revolution broke out in 2021. So this is Mi Yway, Residual Lives by Mi Yway. I think it's a brilliant witness poem. Mi Yway, Residual Lives. Come night, insecurity arrives on its toes with a pair of peeping eyes through bamboo mesh walls. Baby cries, sing-alongs, dog howls, and caterwauls. All those familiar noises are gone. Between the dome of the firmament and the roof of our homes, only the crows caw over and over again. Moles, fingers, snitches, Dalan, words that are news to me. Foe has no label written on his forehead, but he is close, very close. In the depth of the night, when all lights are out, everyone must hold their breath. First, the footsteps of the army boots, then the orders. 2 from this house, 3 from that house. Put them down, beat them up. Rabid dogs snatch our neighbors. The Dalan, a finger whose moray flesh is infested with maggots, is there to help. A bullet out of the darkness is blind and will hit a random target. It will destroy everything in its path. At a corner of this wall, a most violent plot unfolds out of a tragic opera. Comes the next morning, a group of remaining women from the neighborhood take to the streets to witness the truth. Their mouths will speak up, their hands will stretch, they will pawn their own lives for their husbands and sons who have fallen on that bloodstained asphalt road. By 8 p.m., with their residual voices, they will bang pots and pans in protest until they hear the footsteps and the finger again. Thank you.
Thank you, Coco. And Kenneth is going to lead the Q&A. Kenneth, do you see any questions? Have you received any?
I don't see any questions in the chat box. So let's remind the audience that if you have questions about the so-called Burma Spring Revolution or the military coup and how the literary community, the poetry community essentially is responding to it and what has happened to many of the poets, or any general questions about what you may have heard, please go ahead and type that in. We look forward to hear from you. We leave behind a generous chunk of time so that we can have a conversation with you just like that. Maybe I can just start with kick us off with this question more. You have an ongoing virtual remote relationship with many of the Burmese poets because they translate their poetry and they read it in Burmese, and then through them you also come to know their Burmese poetry and English translations of their poem. How does this coup change your relationship with the Burmese poets that you have come to know? We'll be careful not to name them so that we won't bring extra attention to them or exposure to them.
Right.
But please, let us know, how does your relationship change after the coup with your Burmese poets?
My relationship with my Burmese poet friends who've been translating my poems, ever since the coup, I haven't had much interaction at all. The government, as we know, has cracked down on many people, including poets. And I am in contact with Kenneth and with Ko Ko, and we try to stay in touch about what's going on there. But it's it's so tragic what's happening in Burma, Myanmar, and I just my heart goes out to everyone involved in the protests and everyone who is trying to survive through this really difficult time.
Thank you very much. Yeah, one question from Paulina. She wants to know what's happening in the literary life of Burma today. For example, what are the connections between what is happening there and in the Burmese diaspora? Ko Ko Thett, do you want to give us your thoughts on that? And then perhaps we can also have Yway talk about that too, because she recently came. So her experience with the Burmese literary community is much more recent than us. So Ko Ko Thett.
Oh yes, I mean in general, I will say that in times like when there's a huge conflict in a country, when there's repression, and there's movement of writers and poets outward from that country, usually what happens can be that the diaspora becomes the center. And it's true with the Palestinian scenes, and what's happening with us is also very similar. In Burma, many poets and writers, of course, they remain in jail. Some have fled, and some are gone forever. So diaspora becomes kind of center again, like as if in the 80s and the 90s. So many publications are outside the country, like Momaka Channel and others. And of course, social media is very active as well. So many people are connected via social media and publications in Burma in general, not so much political publications, except on social media, but many new writings and exciting writings these days appear in the diasporic publications.
Yway, if you can come back on video for a minute, I think there is a question that you might be best suited to answer in the Q&A. Do we know how wide the audience for poetry is within Myanmar, and are contemporary poems a frequent topic of discussion inside the country? Before you left the country, Yway, what's like the poetry scene? For example, were there poetry readings? Were there group-like gatherings before the coup? And what was the poetry scenes like? And is poetry a big part of the Burmese society in general?
Yeah. Sorry, please wait. Before the coup, like 5 years, we have a very good time. That there is a lot of poetry reading, and also publishing a lot of books and a lot of movements. But after the coup, so we don't publish, because normally even though you are not writing about them, they are thinking like you are writing about them, so you can be in trouble. So we have to take care of these things. And also people are writing like, mostly these days most people only focus on like politics kind of poems. They write about this and not about, like before that our poetry is like, we have a lot of, you can write whatever you want, but after that this things is the only thing you could think of and you will write about this. So it's like the straight line, and then not different types of writing in these days. Yeah, that's what I see.
Certainly that's becoming the Spring Revolution is becoming the overriding theme among the Burmese poets, even those who normally don't consider themselves political poets. So one more question. Can you speak a little bit about the current writing, reading, and recitation of poetry by poets in Myanmar after the coup under the military violence? So Yway talked about that. Yway talked about that a bit. But Ko Ko Thett, can you talk about how perhaps after the coup, where do poets publish? You can't really go to a publisher and publish because the publisher will get arrested, and most official publishing houses probably wouldn't want to publish anything that is remotely political now. So where do the poets find outlet now?
Usually poets continue to write on social media, but now they set up, you have to subscribe to their social media pages and so on. Before it's free and open to everyone, right? But now they are very careful. Poets such as Yalin, their social media pages, you have to be their friends to be able to see or read the poems, even though Yalin is now not in the country anymore. So I can name him. So many other poets are in that situation. So they continue to write, but they are very careful. And I have not actually seen any poetry reading happening in Myanmar since March, April. And when I was living there, 2016, 17, 18, those days, every other day there's a reading. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. That's the only things I've seen are done by poets who have gone into the ethnic controlled areas where they are not under threat, or they are happening in the Burmese diaspora overseas, like you or me and other people who live abroad. One more question: what motivates you to write during or despite this time of extraordinary violence? Maybe more, I can bring you back into the loop as well. When you feel like you are your own identity or your own way of thinking is under threat in that kind of political system, does it still do you still feel motivated to write? This is slightly different from writing under the junta, but I think you can relate to it.
Yes, I can relate to that. And I feel that what is going on in Myanmar, I was born in the US, but my parents were born in Myanmar and emigrated in the early 60s. But what's happening makes its way into my writing in different ways. I'm not an explicitly political poet as far as writing, political poems that are purely political. But I know that the imagery and the feelings and the tension and the anxiety definitely makes its way into my work.
How about Ko Ko Thett and Yway? I'm going to start with you, Yway, if you could come back online for a bit. Do you continue to write after the coup while you were still in Burma? And then now that you're in US, do you still feel inspired to write more, or do you feel like you're dealing with too much of the immigrant life and you don't have time to write? What has happened to you now?
Everything is happening. Like at first I feel like I don't know, how to feel, how to describe myself, because there's a lot of things are changing, environment, culture, everything, especially food.
Yeah.
So it is very difficult to adopt the new things to be in your daily life. So it's very difficult to at first, but after that, you are busy with things, so sometimes you can find time to read and write for you. But I wrote a lot of poems after coup.
Mm.
I feel like I was alive again, after the coup. Like you can see things more clearly than before because of the coup. Yeah.
Yeah, that's rather paradoxical. When you feel threatened, you feel more alive.
Yeah.
Ko Ko Thett, did you feel, you obviously feel motivated to write because your output after the coup has been extraordinary. Can you talk about that?
Oh yes, the first day of the coup, I reacted with a poem called "Cooking Up Democracy Dishes in My Very Own Kitchen." It's about the coup leader who considered himself a chef, the chief, chef, and he is doing what he wants, and nobody would care. I mean, he can do what he wants, blood on the kitchen floor, and he has his own recipe about democracy and whatever, and he wouldn't care. No one could. He knew that no one would really effectively intervene. Long before the protests were crushed, I wrote that as a warning to the protest movement. Yeah. And so on. I kept writing, and of course, many poems. I also got. I translated lots and lots of poems that resulted in the book. Picking off new shoes will not stop the spring. Yeah.
There was one question about Demo. Can you talk about U Demo's legacy and courage in his resistance to the military dictatorship in Burma? I can say a little bit about that, but Ko Ko Thett, have you ever met Sia Demo, and what's your impression? What could you say about him and his relationship to anti-junta movements?
Unfortunately, I have never met Sia Demo, but when I was in Belgium, I visited his daughter, who was living in Belgium, and her family, and yeah, and his legacy. Sia Demo was also, kind of politicized by 1988 revolution, so he became. Before he was kind of, he wasn't writing political poems as such. So his career became very much politicized by 1988 revolution, and then his term in jail, right, where he was exposed to more radical students and so on. So he started penning more and more political poems after 1988, and then one more step further he went after he went into exile. Then I think his palette or his canvas really broadened at that time. So he started writing poems such as "Meeting with the Buddha" when he was shocked to find a Buddha statue on the floor of a shop, yeah, antique shop, so on. So I like Sia Demo later work. I mean, it's outstanding. Yeah. And he used to write like almost every day a poem. So one of the most prolific poets that
I remember Demo coming to the Bay Area giving a literary talk.
Yeah.
And I remember distinctly the story that he told about how the first time he was arrested and he was sent to the interrogation center, his interrogator introduced himself and saying that, Sia, I'm actually a fan of your poetry. I'm very sorry, but I have my duty. I have to do what I need to do. And then he proceeded to beat Demo.
Yeah.
That's what he said. Is that strange paradoxical world where your fan could also be your jailer and your torturer. The last question that I'd like to pick up here is the junta trying to counter your good poems with their own? This is kind of funny. I guess we can talk about, the kind of poems that appear in the pro-junta, pro-military, pro-conservative magazines like Myawaddy, for example. Have you ever read them? Aside from the fact that they are of a different political ideology, is there some literary quality to it? What do you think, Ko Ko Thett?
Well, some of the poems are good. I mean, in sound and in rhyming style and so on. At least if you could remove the content, if we can enjoy it objectively, so to speak, just the sound of it. Some of them are really good in terms of making a good sound in the poetry. But of course, poetry usually goes with the content, and it really I am not in a position to judge their literary value. There must be something. I don't want to offhandedly. I don't want to brush the whole genre of that type of poetry as propaganda or anything, because everyone writes, and so those who, there are of course blatant propagandistic poems as well that simply say down with the opposition movement and so on and so on. Yeah, this is another thing. But then that there are some more subtler kind of poems even in those magazines and journals. I'm not very familiar with the contemporary writings, but I grew up in the 80s and the 90s, right? With those, so in those days, almost every publication was censored, and there was censorship. So only the poems that came out in those journals that we had access to, and I enjoyed many of them, despite their content.
Yeah, Yway, what do you think? Are there? I guess there is a complicated relationship that we have. I personally have with some of the poets and writers that I admire, but also know to actually be in support of the military. So I have this kind of tug of war between my admiration for the literary quality, how moving their work is, and also their political stance in this situation. Do you have the same struggle, Yway?
I actually haven't. I never read their poems like you said, like Myawaddy or GMO newspaper, because mostly the some maybe some writers they love to work for the military, but some mostly they are forced to do that, so that's why they do it. So no, I never read them. So and I feel like the most of their writing is like 50 years behind,
Oh, that's true.
I feel like it, yeah. So
Very good, very good. I think that's all the questions that we may have time for. We have actually edged 5 minutes beyond the allotted time. So Ma, please wrap us up.
Yes, no, I just want to thank everyone for joining us today. Please buy Coco's book and the anthology. And Coco, your book is at City Lights Books, right? In San Francisco? Yeah, and the anthology can be ordered at the link I posted. And together, we're going to say,
revolution must prevail.
The revolution will prevail. Everyone, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you.
thank you.